My family faked my medical records to force me into surrogacy for my sister, but I fought back. Hi guys. I wasn't planning on posting this, but after what my parents pulled, I need to get it off my chest. For context, I'm 37 years old, female, and I've had no contact with my parents for over 13 years. I built a life far away from them, one where I didn't have to constantly feel like I was a burden or an afterthought. My husband Greg and I have a wonderful son and a happy home, and up until last week, I was certain I'd never have to deal with my parents again. Then, out of nowhere, they reached out. At first, I ignored the messages. But they kept coming. We need to talk. It's important. Please, just meet with us. One last time. Greg told me not to respond. They didn't care for 13 years. Why now? I should have listened. Because when I finally gave in and met them, I realized something. They didn't reach out because they missed me. They reached out because they needed something. And what did they need? Was my body. Growing up, my sister Emily 40F was the golden child. She could do no wrong. Straight A student, talented, popular. My parents worshipped her. Me? I was the extra. The unexpected second child they weren't planning for. The one who came into the world with a heart condition that drained their savings and ruined their plans. They never outright said I was a mistake, but they didn't have to. I saw it in the way they looked at me. Heard it in the sighs when another hospital bill came. Felt it every time they ignored me in favor of Emily. It was always, Emily has such a bright future. Never, we're proud of you too. By high school, I stopped trying to impress them. Emily was their pride and joy. I was just the inconvenience they tolerated. Then, when I was 18, I got a scholarship. A chance to leave. To finally build a life where I wasn't in Emily's shadow. I took it and ran. My grandparents, who had always been the only ones to treat me like I mattered, helped me cover what the scholarship didn't. My parents? They didn't contribute a single cent. They barely even acknowledged that I was leaving. No goodbye dinner. No words of encouragement. Just a casual, don't waste this opportunity. That was the last real conversation we had. After that, I moved across the country. Met Greg. Got married. Had my son. My pregnancy was brutal. Doctors had warned me for years that because of my heart condition, carrying a baby would be risky. And they were right. I almost didn't make it. I spent weeks in the ICU, barely hanging on. When I was finally stable, my doctor gave it to me straight. Another pregnancy could kill you. That was fine by me. I had everything I wanted: Greg, my son, a life I had built without my parents. For over a decade, they were just a distant memory. Then, last week, they came back. When Greg and I arrived at their house, everything felt off. The small talk was forced. The smiles were fake. And then, after a few minutes, Mom handed me an envelope. This is for you. Inside? A surrogacy contract. For me. I stared at it, expecting some kind of punchline. But they weren't joking. They were dead serious. Emily, it turned out, had been struggling with infertility. And my parents? Had already decided I was going to be her surrogate. Not asked me. Not suggesting it. Decided. Like my body wasn't mine. Like I was just some tool for Emily's happiness. I let out a slow breath. You know I can't do this, right? I said. My heart. Mom waved a hand. Oh, don't be dramatic. Doctors monitor everything these days. You'll be fine. Greg tensed beside me. She almost died last time, he said, his voice sharp. And this time could be worse. Mom just rolled her eyes. Emily has always wanted a baby. This is her last chance. She said it like it was a fact. Like Emily's desires mattered more than my life. And suddenly everything was crystal clear. Dad cleared his throat. After everything we've done for you, you owe us this. I laughed. Because really? What have you done for me? Silence. Because we all knew the answer. They had done nothing. My grandparents paid for my medical bills. Greg's family gave me love and support. And my parents? They had only ever taken. And now? They wanted more. I slid the contract back across the table. No. Mom blinked. Excuse me. I said no. I'm not doing this. Her face fell. Like I was the one being selfish. Like I was the one breaking the family apart. Dad's jaw tightened. You'll regret this. I met his eyes. No. I won't. Then Greg and I stood up. Walked out. And this time? I meant it. I expected them to call. Maybe even show up at my house, demanding I reconsider. But instead? Silence. No texts. No voicemails. No desperate emails. And that scared me more than anything. Because my parents never gave up that easily. Something was coming. I just didn't know what. The first sign that something was wrong came a few days later. I was at work when my phone buzzed. A call from my doctor's office. That alone was weird. I hadn't scheduled any appointments. But when I answered, my stomach dropped. Hi. This is Nurse Lynn from Dr. Carter's office. We received your medical records request for a surrogacy evaluation. But we just need you to come in and confirm a few details before we proceed. I froze. What on earth? My first instinct was to think it was a mistake. But deep down, I knew this had my parents written all over it. They had forged something, documents, signatures, medical requests. Somehow, they had gone behind my back and tried to push the surrogacy through. And that wasn't just controlling. That was criminal. I forced myself to stay calm. I didn't request that, I said evenly. Pause. Oh, are you sure? The paperwork has your name on it. I swallowed hard. I'm sure. And I want a copy of everything they sent you. I could hear her typing on the other end. Of course. We'll have the documents ready for you when you come in. I thanked her, hung up, and just sat there for a moment, heart pounding, hands shaking, because suddenly, this wasn't just some insulting favor they were asking of me. This was fraud. And I wasn't going to let them get away with it. When I got home, Greg was already there. I must have looked like a ghost because his face immediately fell. What happened? I dropped my bag, running a hand through my hair. They forged medical documents, Greg. They actually tried to push the surrogacy through without me. His expression darkened. They did what? I told him everything. The call, the fake paperwork. My parents had tried to make a life-altering medical decision for me. Greg sat there silent. Then finally he said, "We need to talk to a lawyer." I picked up the forged documents the next morning. And sure enough, there it was. A falsified signature. My name written in a way that almost looked like mine, just sloppy enough to pass a quick glance. The listed contact email? Not mine. The mailing address? Not mine either. But the real kicker? The doctor's note stated I was medically cleared to carry a pregnancy. A note from a physician I had never met. I wanted to throw up. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was intentional. They had planned this, gone behind my back, pulled who knows what kind of strings, and tried to force me into risking my life. I clenched my jaw. I was done being their pawn. I was done playing nice. So I took Greg's advice, and I hired a lawyer. The meeting was short. I handed over the documents, explaining everything. My lawyer flipped through the pages, his expression turning grim. This is serious. They committed medical fraud. I already knew that. But hearing it out loud, it made my blood run cold. What are my options? I asked. He set the papers down. We can file a cease immediately. That will legally prohibit them from making any further medical requests on your behalf. And after that? He sighed. If they keep pushing, we can take legal action. This could turn into a criminal case. I let that sink in. A criminal case. Against my parents. A year ago, I would have hesitated. But now, I didn't feel a shred of doubt. They had crossed a line, and they were going to face the consequences. The paperwork was filed that afternoon. Within hours, my parents were served with a formal cease and desist order. And that's when the real chaos began. Because if they were willing to forge medical records, I had no idea what they were capable of next. I barely had time to process everything before the storm hit. My parents got the cease and desist notice the same day it was filed. And within hours, the floodgates opened. Calls, emails, even a voicemail from Emily. The same sister who hadn't spoken to me in over a decade was suddenly desperate to chat. And I knew exactly why. They weren't sorry. They were just sorry they got caught. Greg and I were sitting on the couch when my phone buzzed. Another unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Then, a text popped up. Emily, pick up. We need to talk. I scoffed. Not, hey, I'm sorry about everything. Not, I had no idea what Mom and Dad were doing. Just, we need to talk. Like I owed her my time. Like she hadn't spent years ignoring me. Like she wasn't perfectly fine with the way I had been treated until now. I turned my phone off, tossing it onto the table. Greg arched an eyebrow. That bad? Emily, acting like we're suddenly best friends. He rolled his eyes. Let me guess. Damage control? I nodded. Because this wasn't about making things right. This was about making things disappear. And I wasn't interested. The next morning, I woke up to an email from my lawyer. I read the first sentence and felt my stomach drop. Your parents have responded to the cease by hiring legal counsel of their own. My mind raced. What on earth were they planning? Then, as I kept reading, I found my answer. And it was so much worse than I thought. They weren't backing down. They were escalating. They had filed a counterclaim stating that my refusal to be Emily's surrogate was an act of familial abandonment, and their legal argument? That I had a moral and financial obligation to support my family since they had raised me. I couldn't believe it. They were actually trying to force me into surrogacy by law. Like my body was just some shared family property they had a right to control. Like I wasn't a person, just a resource. I felt sick. Greg read over my shoulder, his jaw tightening. Can they even do that? I shook my head. No. It's ridiculous. But that's not the point. Because this wasn't about winning. They knew they had no legal case. But they were making one thing clear. They were going to drag this out. They were going to make me suffer. And if they couldn't get what they wanted, they were going to ruin me for saying no. My lawyer called soon after. They don't have a leg to stand on, he reassured me. But they're trying to intimidate you into dropping the case. I clenched my fists. So what do? He sighed. We fight it. If they keep pushing, we will file for a protective order. If they escalate further, we go for fraud charges. Fraud charges? Against my parents. A year ago, I would have hesitated. But now? I felt nothing. They weren't my parents. Not anymore. That night, I sat in my son's room watching him sleep, thinking about the kind of mother I wanted to be. I would never do this to him. I would never make him feel like he owed me his life. I would never treat him like a pawn instead of a person. And I would never ever make him feel like I did, like his needs, his safety, his happiness were all second place to someone else. I kissed his forehead, brushing his hair back. Then I walked back to the living room and grabbed my phone. And for the first time, I made the first move. I called my lawyer. Take them to court. He paused. Are you sure? Yes. I want them to know if they keep pushing, there will be consequences. I hung up, exhaling slowly. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about making sure they never did this to anyone else again. I thought things had hit rock bottom. I was wrong. Because the second my lawyer filed the fraud claim, my parents did something even worse. They went public. And suddenly, this wasn't just a family fight. It was a smear campaign. The first sign came through a text from a random number. Unknown, wow. Can't believe you're doing this to your own family. Selfish much. I stared at the screen. Then another one popped up. Unknown, I hope you never need help in the future. No one's gonna be there for you after this. I exhaled slowly. Then, my phone buzzed again. Emily, we need to talk. Now. I blocked the number. Because if they thought I was about to sit down and listen to more guilt tripping, they were delusional. It took me less than 5 minutes to figure out what had happened. My parents had run to social media. And they had spun the story. In their version, I wasn't the daughter they had emotionally neglected. I wasn't the sister whose life they had tried to gamble away. No. I was the selfish, ungrateful child who refused to help her poor, struggling sister. They played the victim perfectly. After everything we did for her, she abandoned us. She won't even help Emily in her time of need. Hundreds of sympathetic comments. People offering to donate. People calling me a monster. It was disgusting. I should have expected it. My parents had always been great at playing innocent. They knew exactly how to twist reality. But the worst part? People believed them. I started getting messages from distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Aunt Lisa, Uncle Tom, even my grandmother. All with the same message. Family is more important than money. Emily would do this for you if the roles were reversed. Do you really want to be the reason she never has kids? I clenched my jaw. Because none of them knew the truth. And none of them had ever cared enough to ask. I shut my laptop, pressing my fingers to my temples. They want a reaction, Greg said quietly. I nodded. Because he was right. This wasn't just about getting Emily a baby anymore. This was about control. This was them saying, we can still ruin you even if you walk away. I took a deep breath. Then let's make sure they regret it. The next morning, I sent my lawyer every single screenshot. The fake medical records. The text messages. And now? The social media posts. He barely looked surprised. This is harassment. We can escalate to a full restraining order. I didn't hesitate. Do it. Because of this? This wasn't just a fight anymore. This was war. Filing for the restraining order meant my parents would get served in person. They couldn't ignore it. They couldn't pretend it wasn't happening. They had to face it. And sure enough, the second it happened, the fake concern disappeared. Yeah? They were furious. The next text came that night. Mom, how could you do this to us? I didn't respond. Then another. Dad, you are a disgrace to this family. Nothing. Then, one last message. Emily, I hope you can live with yourself after this. I actually laughed. Because for the first time in my life, I finally could. I thought cutting them off legally would be the end of it. That they'd take the restraining order as the final nail in the coffin and finally leave me alone. I was wrong. Because of my parents? They weren't done. Not even close. A week after filing, I got a call from work. My boss, Julie, sounded confused. Hey, I just got off the phone with a relative of yours. Your mother. My stomach dropped. What did she say? Julie hesitated. She was crying. Said you were having a breakdown. That you'd been acting erratic and she was afraid for your safety. She wanted to know if we could put you on leave, for mental health reasons. I gripped my phone, feeling my pulse pound. They were trying to make me look unstable. Trying to make me lose my job. I exhaled, forcing myself to stay calm. Julie, my parents are lying. I filed a restraining order against them last week. Silence. Then her voice hardened. That's what I figured. She sounded off. But I wanted to check with you first. I swallowed, trying to push down the rage bubbling in my chest. Did she say anything else? Julie sighed. Just the usual, we're so worried, we just want what's best for her nonsense. But don't worry, I shut it down. You don't have to explain anything to me. I exhaled. Thank you. No problem, she said. But, Alex? What is wrong with your family? I laughed dryly. I wish I knew. I hung up, hands shaking. This wasn't just desperation. This was malice. They couldn't win in court. They couldn't guilt me into backing down. So now? They were trying to ruin my life in any way they could. And that was the last straw. I spent the next few hours compiling everything. Every text. Every email. Every fake story they had spun about me. Then I forwarded it all to my lawyer. We're going after them for defamation, I told him. He didn't even hesitate. Understood. That night, Greg and I sat in the living room, both exhausted. He looked over at me. Are you okay? I stared at the ceiling, trying to untangle the mess of emotions in my head. Anger. Exhaustion. Relief. Because even though this was a nightmare, I wasn't alone. For the first time in my life, I wasn't fighting this battle by myself. I reached for Greg's hand, squeezing it. I will be. And for the first time, I actually believed it. The next morning, my lawyer hit them with everything. A formal defamation claim. Legal warnings about their attempt to interfere with my job. And a clear message if they kept pushing. We were taking this all the way to court. And just like that, the messages stopped. The social media posts? Deleted. The flying monkeys? Silent. Because they finally realized it. I wasn't just walking away. I was burning the bridge behind me. Silence. That was the first thing I noticed. For the first time in weeks, my phone wasn't blowing up with fake apologies, guilt-tripping texts, or messages from random relatives trying to talk sense into me. My parents had finally backed off. Or at least, that's what I thought. Until I got a call from my lawyer. Alex, I just got an interesting update from their side. I braced myself. Because if my parents had taught me anything, it was that they never truly gave up. They want to settle, he said. I blinked. Settle? As in, drop everything? Not quite. They'll back off the surrogacy, retract their legal claim, and stop interfering with your life if you agree to sign an NDA. An NDA? Of course. They weren't apologizing. They weren't admitting they were wrong. They just wanted to shut me up. I let out a bitter laugh. So, let me get this straight. They lie, they manipulate, they forge medical records, and now that they realize they can't win, they want me to pretend it never happened. That's the gist of it, my lawyer said. And if I say no? Then we proceed with the defamation case and they risk this getting even more public. I could almost see my parents panicking. They had played the victim for so long, spun so many lies. And now? They were terrified of what would happen if people found out the truth. Greg walked in as I was still on the phone. I put it on speaker. What happens if we take this to court? He asked. My lawyer exhaled. Honestly? You have a solid case. The fraud alone is bad enough, but their attempt to interfere with your job and publicly defame you? It's strong evidence. So, we could win? Most likely. But it would be a long process. And emotionally, it won't be easy. I sat there thinking. I had spent my whole life letting them win. Letting them make me feel small. Letting them rewrite the narrative to suit their version of reality. And now? They were asking me to do it again. To sign a document that would keep me quiet. To erase the truth. To give them power over me one last time. Tell them no, I said firmly. My lawyer hesitated. Are you sure? If we proceed, it could get messy. I exhaled. It's already messy. And I'm done letting them control the story. Greg squeezed my hand. We'll fight this, he said. And for once, I wasn't fighting alone. The response from my parents was immediate. My mom called voicemail after voicemail, escalating from pleading to furious. My dad sent an email. You have no idea what you're doing. You'll regret this. And Emily? For the first time in this entire mess, she reached out. Emily, I can't believe you're willing to ruin our family over this. Mom is devastated. Just sign the NDA and move on. I stared at the message, shaking my head. Even now, she didn't get it. Even now, she expects me to be the one to fix things. Like I had started this. Like I was the problem. I typed out one final response. Me, the only thing ruining this family is mom and dad's inability to accept that they don't own me. This was their doing, not mine. Then, I blocked her. Because I was done explaining myself. And if they thought I was going to roll over and let them erase what they didn't know me at all. I didn't expect them to give up. But I also didn't expect them to crumble so fast. The second I refused the NDA, my parents went into full retreat mode. No more emails. No more phone calls. No more desperate attempts to control the narrative. It was like they had finally realized it. I wasn't playing their game anymore. And without control, they had nothing. The defamation case moved forward. Their lawyer tried to argue that it was all a misunderstanding, that my parents had just been concerned for me and things had gotten out of hand. But my lawyer shut that down immediately. Concern doesn't include forging medical records. Concern doesn't include trying to sabotage someone's job. Concern doesn't include launching a smear campaign against your daughter. Every lie they had told, every manipulation, it was laid out in black and white. And by the time the judge ruled in my favor, my parents didn't even show up to the final hearing. The settlement was significant. Enough to cover all my legal fees. Enough to make sure they'd never try this again. But the money? I didn't care about that. What mattered was the message. They didn't own me. They never did. And now? They never would. A few weeks after the case closed, I got a final email. Not from my parents. From Emily. I almost ignored it. But curiosity got the best of me. It was short. I hope you're happy. You got what you wanted. That was it. No apology. No reflection. Just another attempt to make me the villain. I deleted it without replying. Because Emily would never understand. She had never needed to. She had spent her whole life being the center of their world. And me? I had spent my whole life fighting to prove I deserved a place in it. But not anymore. Because I had finally realized. I didn't need them. I never had. Months passed. Then a year. And you know what? Life got better. I didn't have to check my phone with a pit in my stomach. I didn't have to live in fear of what they'd try to take from me next. I could just breathe. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. I don't know what my parents are doing now. I don't check. I don't care. Because for 37 years, they tried to make me believe I owed them my life. That I was just a spare part for their perfect family. That my wants, my needs, my safety, none of it mattered. But now, I know the truth. I don't owe them anything. Not my time. Not my loyalty. And certainly not my body. Hope you enjoyed this story as much as I do. Help this small channel grow by hitting that like button, subscribing, and sharing with your friends. Every bit of support means the world. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.